And welcome to another episode of Experts Speak. I'm Michael DeLon, and I am talking today with Arthur Petropoulos. And well, Arthur, first of all, thank you for squeezing me into your calendar and talking with me today.
Oh, all good, Michael. I'm glad to be here and appreciate the time.
Well, you are welcome. It's going to be a great conversation. So Arthur leads a company that helps business owners who are between like $1 and $10 million of if I get this right, pre-tax money, right? Profits,
Yeah, profit. Yep.
profits, find ways to exit or to acquire capital so that they can do more fun things. And so I'm going to, this is just really intriguing to me, Arthur. We're going to have a great conversation. Tell me, as we get into this, how in the world did you get to doing what you do?
Sure. So I would say growing up, I always had a fascination with, call it business history, right? Or how, which, from my perspective, business history and the world history is kind of one and the same, because if you really look back on why did people do things or why did certain activities take place, whether it was the Columbus sailing the seas or Amerigo Vespucci or the Dutch West Indies Company, right? All of these things were driven by some sort of business ideas or ventures or ideas to kind of, and we live in a world of infinite want and finite resources, and therefore business must exist. And so my dad actually, when I grew up, used to read me history books as a child of some of these, and it was always kind of tying into that. And then there would be some of the philosophies of Plato and Aristotle and whatnot, but all of it always tied together to this kind of foundational idea of world history, which is really war and business to some degree. And so I found it fascinating. And so when I was growing up, wanted to be in the business of business, so to speak, or where businesses bought and sold, transactions, capital. And the only people I knew who did it were attorneys, actually, back where I grew up here outside Providence. And so when I was done with my business undergrad degree, I naturally went to law school. And it was in law school that I kind of figured out how this whole ecosystem comes together. What is private equity? What is investment banking? How does capital work? And after law school, I was able to get into Wall Street, called middle market investment banking firm, and progressed my way until ultimately started the company here. But what I found fascinating in all of that experience was it's almost like two different worlds. So we think of business as like the public markets. And so you think of stocks and bonds, but there's this gigantic ecosystem of private capital out there that buys businesses, that provides capital. And when you talk to the average person who owns a business, sizable at that, there's just not a familiarity with how all of these gears and levers and pulleys work. And so I found it a fascinating place to be, that you get to work with both sides of that spectrum, all kind of the participants, and I guess see how the whole machine works. And you think of the world as this kind of Rube Goldberg, machine of sorts that ultimately cracks the egg. And always wanted to see how that worked on an economic perspective and from businesses. So that's the $2 answer for the 50-cent question about how we got into this.
I love it. I love it. So yeah, you just opened up a couple of things that I hadn't really thought about, because when I came into this, I was thinking, okay, how do you set your business up to exit or something like that? But you mentioned there's this whole world of investment banking. And I mean, I can't tell you how many emails and phone calls I get every week from people saying, we have pre-approved $100,000 line of credit for you, Mike. And it's like, oh, would you stop it? But you can help a business owner who has a good, solid business find capital to grow their company, and maybe at the same time start planning to say, you know what, after you hit $1 million, 2 million, 5 million, do you want to exit? Because you can help them do that. Is that close?
Yeah, that's a lot of it, because I think in any process or engagement, it's kind of this combination of inbounds and outbounds. And so if you run a business for long enough and get to a certain size, inevitably you'll be on someone's radar through some database, and you'll start getting the inbounds of, hi, we'd like to give you money. Hi, we'd like to acquire you. And a mentor of mine once said, it's difficult to differentiate the prospects from the suspects, right? Like if you're heads down building your business all day and you pick your head up and say, who are these people? Are they real? Is it not real? And there's a lot in this business of kind of who has capital, who really doesn't, who's just trying to tie up deals. And so I think everybody needs kind of we need a zealous advocate on a legal perspective. We need it on an accounting perspective. And we always say you should have it on a capital and strategic transactions perspective too. And so that's largely the service that we provide. But yes, so it's always kind of wrangling all of the inbounds, putting a strategy together, figuring out what are the objectives clearly, because I think sometimes people say, hey, I'd like to do this, or maybe this would be interesting, but sitting down and saying, what do we actually want to accomplish, and then putting a path to that. And so what oftentimes, to your point, it does kind of go from capital to growth to an ultimate exit. Sometimes it's just the exit. It takes different shapes and forms, but that's our job, is to be kind of that trusted advisor that's only looking out for our clients. So to tie one thing back in, is that we're a sell side firm. And so we only represent businesses, business owners, executives. We don't represent the capital providers or the acquirers. And therefore, in the private equity firms, and therefore there's never any, moral hazard or conflict of interest. And so our clients like the fact that, okay, we've got someone that understands this world, that's our advocate and kind of our Sherpa up this mountain to a degree.
Yeah, no, that's a good way to put it, because understanding that world would be a nightmare. Because I know nothing about your world, right? I've heard about it, I've read books about it, and I go, there's so many in it's like a rat maze at one level, right? There's so many different paths you could take, and if a business owner tries to go down it, they're probably going to hit a bunch of walls, red tape, and probably get taken once or twice. Versus working with somebody like you who's been there, done that, you're schooled in it, you understand it, to be able to say, what is your purpose? Do you want to grow and sell? Is that the deal? Or do you want to grow and keep and hold and make this a legacy business for your family? Are those the kinds of discussions you have with business owners?
Yeah, oftentimes. And look, and I'd say the same to your business. If I wanted to understand how books and publishing and content creation worked in that regard, it's foolish to think that life's too short and maybe our brains are too small to understand everything about everything. And so we always have to kind of best allocate our bandwidth and try to get the wisdom of other people that have already kind of been through the ringer in a particular industry. And so, but tying back to your particular question, yeah, that's a lot of it, is kind of figuring out, you're on island A, what is island B? And then how do you get from A to B, right? So it's defining what that kind of ultimate future state would want to be, right? And defining, is it, because look, at some point, every business sells, so to speak, whether it's to a third party or whether to the next generation, but given the finite nature of our existence here, right, everything does transition. And so it's kind of defining that. And there's different ways to go about it. And it's not always just keeping 100% or selling 100%. There's other options of selling a minority, selling a majority, taking on a strategic partner, taking on family as a strategic partner. There's so many different flavors of this that it does take some real concentrated thought to kind of define what the ideal future state looks like. And then you can kind of back into, how do you, whether it's a boat or a rocket ship, how do you get from A to B in that exercise?
Yeah, I love it. So let's talk a little bit about, as a business owner is thinking about this. So what's going on in the business owners' minds before they would reach out to you? What are some of the questions that they're sitting there thinking? That's the first thing. Then we'll talk about how you work with them. But what's going on in their mind?
Sure. I think a lot of times the questions that are often asked, and it depends on the size of the business, but they'll sometimes contemplate, is this a sellable thing in its current state, right? Because I think you can have businesses that are very big that are hard to sell. You can have businesses that are very small that are easy to sell. There's different ways to set these things up in a way that makes them more sellable or makes them more financeable. So question people will often say is, how, is this sellable? How would I go about that? And what's it worth? And then I guess to add to that, what would that process look like, right? So it's always kind of understanding what something's worth, understanding how to monetize that or turn that into reality. And then again, going back to that island hopping idea, right? What does the path look like? What does it entail? And what are we likely to encounter along the way? Because I don't think people have an aversion to hard work or an aversion to a path that has some look, we make these as smooth as possible, but like in any business transaction, there's always something that comes up that takes some concentration and time. People don't have an aversion to it as long as there's clarity to what that path is. Right. I think it's the unknown that makes people say, I don't want to go near that. Right. So when you can delineate it or illustrate what it's going to be, you can really work together in a very productive manner.
Yeah, no, I resonate with that so much, because as most of our clients have never written a book. They've always thought about it. And so the phrase that I use is it's like walking into a dark room that you've never been in before, Arthur, right? You're scared. It's okay. I've been in that room 100 times. I know where all the furniture is. I know where the light switch is. Take my hand. Let me guide you through. And that just, people feel at ease. Very much like what you take people through, because I know how to start a business. I have no idea how to sell it to somebody. What do you mean?
Sure.
So yeah, laying out a process and answering those questions. And then, so somebody is starting to think this, okay, they've been in business 5 years, 10 years, and they've got a good profitable business. Let's say they're generating $3 million a year gross, right? Is that sellable? What do I do? Who would even buy this thing, right? I don't know anybody. Those are the questions that I would have that I assume you can answer, right?
That's correct. And so yeah, understanding, because it's different than, I think, the funny thing is that a lot of people sell their businesses by themselves, but they'd never sell their house by themselves. But arguably, I think convincingly, a business is a far harder thing to sell. It's a far more inefficient market, and there's a much bigger dispersion between offers. And so if you went to go sell your house by yourself and you threw it on Zillow, you might get 10 offers, and they'll probably all be within 10 to 15% of each other, give or take, right? And
Yeah.
the structure is all going to be the same. I will pay you at closing. That's it. For a business, you could get 10 offers, and they could be twice, the best offer could be twice as much dollar wise as the lowest offer. The structures could be entirely different. One could be all at closing, one could be 20% at closing, and the rest you get if you can jump over a building. I mean, there's transition periods, there's what happens to the employees and the stakeholders. There's so many variables that I think it's important to get the largest amount of data points, and therefore running a proactive process. People think you sell a business by talking to 5 people. You sell a business talking to 200 people. And by virtue of getting all those data points, you really see where it kind of clusters on the regression line, if you will, and also where all these other variables fall in, what everybody's willing to do. And you kind of create a matrix of sorts to optimize the variables. And so yeah, you're absolutely right. It's just painting those pictures, because I think at the end of the day, whatever business you're in, people hire you to make their lives easier, not harder, right? They hire you to take things off their plate, not add things to them. And so we find the fallacy in our business by some of our competitors is that they just give more work to their, to their clients. And so it's our job to take that stress away, give them the high level path of how it's going to work. But every time there's a part in that path where it says, okay, and here you got to dig an 8-foot hole, and here you got to chop a tree down, and here we do that. And so we do it all, and then we can just kind of give you the results of it and allow you to make the key decisions, but while not distracting you from your business and not fatiguing you during the process.
That's good, because I hadn't thought about it until you just said that. A business owner trying to sell their own business, I can only imagine all of the decisions that would have to be made, all of the research that has to be done, all of the proposals.
Right.
And if you're a business owner trying to do that, I could see it's likely that your business can actually start producing less revenue.
Right. And that's like the I was so busy going on dates, I gained 30 pounds and stopped working out, right? And so it's like it becomes detrimental to the objective that you're actually looking to pursue. And so I say that facetiously, but with businesses, you're right. It's you don't want the most critical time to perform well is kind of in that process through the closing. And therefore, if the process in itself detracts from the performance, we've had a lot of clients come to us that said, I tried to do it myself. Performance started to slip. I got distracted. And it's not because they were deficient in any means. It's just one human's brain can only do so much. And so once they pivoted to us, they were able to kind of get everything back on track, get the growth trajectory going back to it where it should be, and then kind of sprint through the finish line instead of kind of limp through it.
Yeah. And it's interesting because as you're listening to this, think about all of those other entrepreneurs we all hear about who are multiple entrepreneurs. They build a business, they sell it. They build a business, they sell it. They're probably not doing that themselves, because most entrepreneurs are really good at the front end.
Right.
It's all this other stuff. So they probably have hired Arthur to say, can you take care of all of that? And Arthur works with them. Is that a fair thing to say?
Yeah, look, I mean, take it as nature or nurture, however you want to look at it. And I think kind of God puts in everybody a particular passion or a particular I guess natural aptitudes. We can enhance everything, but there are definitely things that some people are better at than others, or are more inclined to want to
Right.
pursue. And so I think, yeah, business, you have business starters, you have business growers, you have business like mature business operators. There's different personalities and
Right.
temperaments that fit different stages. And so, no, I think the person, I put it this way, look, I mean, I wear the same white shirts and tweed jackets every day. Like, I'm not the guy who's inventing the next app that does some sexy thing, right? We're the
Yeah.
guys that kind of plow through the process. We learn the market, we talk to people. And so you have to know, I think, double down on what you know well and delegate what
Yeah.
someone else may be able to add more value to. And so, and most people recognize that. And so you're right, these kind of serial entrepreneurs, they tend to have kind of their, I think of it like a house flipper, right? When someone's going and flipping houses, they've got their squad, if you will, right? Oh, I got the
Right.
roof guy, I got the plumber, I got this guy, and they kind of have them swarm on every situation when it's time to do something. And I'd say people who have been kind of that serial entrepreneur personality, they tend to have their go-to attorney, CPA, investment banker, advisor, tax person. And so very, very similar. And I think to some extent the more successful people that we've seen have been those that have been able to kind of allocate labor in the most efficient manner.
Yeah, because it really is it really is a team effort. And
Right.
as you mentioned earlier, it's really counterproductive for a business owner to spend time, effort, energy trying to learn this world. Just it's just not the highest and best use of our time.
I agree. And I think it's look, I think lone wolves are good in the front end, but as the business progresses, it becomes harder to be that way, right?
Yeah.
I think when you start a business, you really got to lock yourself in a basement and work for
Yes.
5, 10 years. But once you kind of get to a certain level of traction, proof of concept, things are working and getting momentum, you will hit a point of constraint whereby the only means of mitigating that is getting your team better, right? Building your brotherhood, building your, and it doesn't always mean employees. It could just mean a series of contractors, vendors, software, but means of getting leverage, creating that fulcrum. And I don't know if it was,
Yeah.
I don't know if it was Archimedes or whoever, but they said, look, give me a lever and a fulcrum big enough and I'll move the world. And so it's very similar in business. You do hit constraint points where you need to bring on other resources in whatever shape, form, or fashion that might take.
Yeah. It's very cool. Do you help business owners as well? Not just thinking about, okay, now let's say somebody says, I'm thinking about some of my business. They talk to you, you go, okay, yep, that's where I'm going. Awesome. What about the next stage? Do you help them at least think through? Are you going to create another business? Are you going to take a vacation? Are you going to take this money and put it in legacy? Do you help them think through that? And do you have
Sure.
resources how does that process work?
Yeah, I mean, to some extent, I think from the blocking and tackling of like what are the tax implications and stuff like that, we give general advice and we bring in certain specialized tax people that can help on
Hmm.
certain things like that. But I think qualitatively or conceptually, that's a large part of the conversation, right? Everything has to have a purpose.
Right.
There has to be a mission, otherwise you're just kind of going with the wind, right? And so the first conversation we have with people when they say I'd like capital or I'd like to sell my business, why? Tell me, what's the objective? What is at the end of all of this that makes everything you've kind of endured worth it? And everybody has that, and it's different for different people. And sometimes, depending on age, season in life, family, sometimes it's, hey, I got to take my foot off the pedal a little so I can kind of smell the roses. Nothing wrong with that. Sometimes it's, I've got 5 businesses and I could be much better at 2 than 5.
Yeah.
And other times it's, I need capital to just double and triple down on exactly what I'm doing. I just want to do more of it. And so everybody's got a different objective, but it is part of that process. Because I always say our business is a bit of art and a bit of science, right? It's a bit of qualitative and quantitative. And so, yeah, there's numbers and figures and things that have to be determined, but also what are the true objectives, right? The nice thing in our business, what I like in the size of company we work with is it's always the owners of it tend to always have a hand in the business, right? They're not these passively owned things that are owned by a gigantic company. It's owned by the person whose wallet is involved, whose time has been involved. And so I think it's a big decision, not just for them, but for their families, for generations of their families. And so all of that has to be part of the equation. I enjoy that because it brings I think, an extra deep meaning to these transactions and why we're doing it and why they're doing it. But yes, so to answer your question, that's a big part of the dialogue.
Very cool. Let me ask you this other question. This just really hit me as you were talking about is I think a lot of business owners, as we build our businesses, we have a relationship with a local bank, usually,
Yep.
right? And that's good. But sometimes those local banks get constrained by, the higher ups and things. You probably have access, I'm guessing, to other capital. Talk about that.
Sure. So there's an entire ecosystem of, call it, bank and non-bank capital out there that is, I think, largely unknown to the average business owner. And I mean, business owners that could be running a $50 million, $100 million business would still not likely understand kind of how it all pieces together. And so you're right. We find that when we come into situations, either the bank, the capital with the company is oftentimes either a regional bank or a gigantic bank. And if it's regional, they tend to be sometimes getting too big for the bank. And if it's a gigantic bank, they've always been too small, and they're frustrated because I thought JP Morgan or I thought Citi, or I don't want to malign anyone, but right, I think they are specialized with a certain size of company, right? If you're a company that's a $30 million company and you've got Wells Fargo as your lender, you're not going to get anybody to pay attention to what you're doing. And so sometimes it's moving it with kind of to a different group within the regional bank. Sometimes they'll have kind of more commercial versus just kind of small business, and you have to really advocate to get it within the right people. Sometimes it's bringing it to there's these kind of tweener banks that we work with that have the capabilities of the big banks, but have the attention span of the small banks. So in every state kind of throughout the country, and then in different countries, we have a real good understanding of the landscape of who some of these capital providers are. And then that's just the traditional banking world. So you get into, there's private equity and private credit who will buy small pieces of companies, provide non-bank loans to kind of shorter time frame, nuanced situations. So obviously, so you'll have a situation sometimes where company was performing really well, it got distressed, someone bought it as a distressed company, and they come to us and say, I need capital to get this thing back on the right foot. So sometimes we'll bring in a non-bank lender for a 1-year loan, they get it on the right foot, and then we bring in a bigger bank to take it out on refinance it on a more traditional interest rate. And so there's all sorts of different shapes and fashions, but that's why it's so important to kind of say, where are we? Where have we been? Where are we now? Where are we going? And you can almost kind of tie up a parallel path of kind of strategic objectives and conversations along with that.
Wow. That's amazing, because I mean, very similar parallels to real estate, buying
Right.
real estate, finding hard money to buy it, revamp it, flip it, get a mortgage. There you go. Rent it.
Yeah, I think it's a lot of, when you buy something, when there's an opportunity, oftentimes that opportunity is kind of shrouded in, some sort of a narrative or story to it, right? There's always that joke, say people run into burning buildings and they stay in some of them, right? It's because some things are mispriced because they're just bad. Some things are mispriced because, to me, it's accurately priced and poor, but other situations are mispriced because there's an opportunity. But oftentimes the opportunities necessitate some stabilization. And so to your point, you need opportunistic capital to stabilize, to then refinance to more traditional capital. It's a lot of what we do.
That's cool. And having somebody like Arthur on your team, because Arthur knows the players, Arthur brings a level of credibility and really leverage, because you speak of the language, right? I'm sure there's a language that's spoken with investment bankers and things that business owners just don't speak. And right? That helps.
And to some degree, you can go to the capital providers and acquirers and say, look, we just give us what the best thing is first here. You can twist arms a little more. I always say, although we do everything diplomatically, I don't need to be everybody's best friend. So whereas a business owner sometimes they're so used to client service and doing things and just the client's always right, that when they talk to some of these capital or acquirers, they sometimes take the same mentality of just kind of deferring, obliging, and they're doing it out of the goodness of their heart, of being good people. But sometimes we have to say, listen, let us go in there and be a bit of a pit bull. We're not going to disrupt anything. However, we will extract the best that they can possibly do. And so that way we know, because I think no one wants to regret, a year later, I wonder if I could have gotten more if I asked for more.
Right. Yeah. Having a pit bull on your team, I like that. because they know the players, they do it all day, every day, and they have vast experience working with companies. So if you're listening, if you're thinking about needing capital to grow your business or to get it on the right track, if you're considering possibly selling your business, or maybe buying a business. I mean, you've got a lot of people. If somebody wants to
Sure.
buy a business, can they reach out to you?
Yeah, look, I think we don't, so we would just basically have the businesses that we're representing and we say, hey, if you want to be part of that process, we'll love to get you, included on one of them. And also people just, we're, even though we don't represent acquirers per se,
Right.
we're talking to them all day. And so they're constantly telling us, hey, Arthur, I'm looking for a industrial distribution company. Hey, I'm looking for a software company that does this. I'm looking for that. And so we have a big kind of database that we're always updating. So yeah, if anyone ever reaches out to us and says, hey, I'm looking for this, that does this at this size in this place, inevitably something will come up that ticks that box.
That's awesome. Well, when you get the guy who wants to invest like, $10 million in a book publishing company, you let me know. Okay.
There we go.
Arthur, this has been phenomenal. I know I've got about 20 more questions. We could go on for another hour or two. It's really cool what you do. How do people take that next step? Where do they find more information about you, your company, to say, well, this is intriguing. I need a little bit more information.
Sure. So I'd say check out our website. It's hillviewps.com. So HILLVIEWP as in Peter, S as in Sam.com. It's actually have a new site going live. Should be today. The website companies get annoyed by how many times I ask them, but it'll either be today or tomorrow. I'd say from a social media perspective, our main one is on LinkedIn. So my name, Arthur Petropoulos, or Hillview Partners on the company page. We put out videos every week on LinkedIn, kind of some explanatory about different concepts that come up in a lot of these things. And then also we just kind of repost that same content out on YouTube under my name, and then on Twitter as well. But a lot of it's the same. You just don't have to log into LinkedIn to see it. But yeah, we're always happy to have the conversations with people, always happy to be a resource, and we really enjoy meeting different people doing different things.
That is awesome. Well, I'm going to capture those, Arthur, and get them in the show notes. Because busy business owners who listen to this many times are working, they're walking the dog, they're on vacation, whatever. So if you're listening, if this has been intriguing to you, check out the show notes, reach out to Arthur and his team. We've got everything in the show notes, and just have that conversation around how do you find access to capital in a new and different way? How can you position yourself to exit your business without doing all the work, without running the rat maze yourself? Find that expert, let Arthur guide you through that pathway, and get your business to where you want it to be, put it in the hands of somebody else. Just have the conversation with Arthur and his team. Arthur, man, thank you for being my guest. This has been a really, really fun conversation.
Oh, I appreciate it, Michael. It's been a pleasure and a great time. Thank you.
You are quite welcome. Glad to have you as a guest on Experts to Speak. Have a great day, sir.
Thank you as well.